Hey everyone, this is part 2 of the POV episode. If you didn't listen to part 1, you're missing out.
So maybe it's worth mentioning, like, as you are making these decisions as a writer, when you're deciding how to use POV in your story and how the story should be told, deciding whether you want one close POV, if you're doing third close, or doing third person multiple, like the George R.R. Martin thing where you have a lot of characters. I think that some stories, probably like something huge and sprawling like Game of Thrones, are better served by having a lot of different POV characters, each with their own arc that you're following in different chapters. Whereas, you know, some stories can be more focused on one character and their singular experience.
Yeah, I think scale is a big part of that, like you were saying. So, like, you know, if you're dealing with a bunch of widespread events where your character can't physically be in the room for everything, if you have multiple POVs, you don't have to go through the rigmarole of like trying to figure out a way for your character to hear about something happening or watching it on TV or whatever. And Joe Abercrombie does that as well, like really, really well.
Yeah, I was going to bring him up because one thing that he solves is he has multiple POVs even in the same chapter. I mean, when Giselle and Logan are going through the desert with Baez, you get the same scene essentially from 3 different people.
Yeah, it's not, but it's separate chapters, isn't it?
I remember I just listened to it, and it's the same chapter, and it's just broken off, I think.
So your head jumps.
But again, it comes back to that thing where there is a like
there's a page break.
There's at least a break.
For
It's
sure.
clear, but he does do that where he shows, where he shows the same scene from different perspectives, and you kind of jump back and forth in time a little bit sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which, when you talk about it, sounds awkward, but somehow when he writes it
wonderful.
It kind of works. I don't know how he
because
does
you
that.
get the same. One of the things that third close limits you in is, you know, we talked about it, you're in this person's head, so you only get this one viewpoint. So because he does the multiple people in this same scene, you get almost this omniscient view of it through the lens of 3 different people.
Yeah.
But I think that to kind of stay on Joe Abercrombie for a second too, he uses it effectively as well to take you to like different sides of the battle, if you will. So it's like, you know, I don't remember which book it is, but what's the one where they're fighting all the way up in the north and like he's got the giant tribesman, the chieftain, and they're like, there's the one
The feared.
The feared, yes, exactly. That's great. So, and I can't remember, but there's literally like, there's one character who's up there with him and those guys, and you're like, okay, we gotta we don't have enough guys here. Like, I don't know how we're gonna hold them off.
Yeah.
Cut to, they're on the other side of the battle where they're like the Union or whoever is coming up, and they're like, oh boy, I don't know how we're gonna take these guys. This is a narrow pass. Like, and so the great thing about multiple, and George R. R. Martin does this too throughout the Games of Thrones book, you have this big turning point, a big plot point in the story, and he uses multiple third person close to be able to keep you on sort of both sides of the conflict.
Exactly.
Until the point where it's like they're literally like marching towards each other.
Yeah.
Which is why it suits huge epic fantasies so well, is because it really slows down your pace when you do it. You know, you've got that big story point, and you've got all these different POVs that revolve around the big story point. So you don't have beat after beat after beat of the story moving forward. You've got one huge thing and all these perspectives sort of working around it.
Well, and I think it's also, again, bringing it back to like movies and television, I think that's one of the reasons that Game of Thrones specifically translates so well to TV.
To television.
It's sort of, there are so many characters and you can kind of sort of come pick your angles, if you wish. You know, there's one big event and it's like, okay, how do we want to come at this?
Yeah, which is one of the criticisms of Game of Thrones all the time. If you're going to hear anyone say anything about it, oh, it's so slow moving, you know, and so someone that's looking for a fast-paced story is not going to love that.
No.
You know, it's not going to love that TV series.
It's interesting because
it's not what it's about.
Yeah, and pacing becomes a real issue, and really down to the actual writing kind of line by line, where because you are in this one person's head the whole time, how do you keep this story moving? Because you're like, you have to pick which thoughts you're going to say. And, you know, to get kind of technical for a minute, it's like, okay, what things need to be sold in summary? You know, I'm not going to give every beat of this person moving through the building, getting ready, get up on their horse, and now I'm riding. So, you know, this person's going to move through time just like any character in any story. But if you're an omniscient, you can say, you know, this character got on the horse and they rode, and then the next day they showed up there. And you can do that in third person close too, but you have to be able to say what that person was feeling and how did they feel when they got off the horse and how they feel. Like, you got to be able to sort of tell us a little bit more of what's going on. You can't just kind of click around.
Yeah, there needs to be internality, or the reader is not going to resonate with the character.
Exactly.
So the message is, if you're choosing multiple third person close, just be ready that you're going to have to set up every chapter. There's, there has to be...
You got to know where all the pieces on the chessboard are.
You have to know where all the pieces...
Yeah.
Yeah, and just be ready for a longer story, I think, as well.
So what about first person? We haven't really addressed that.
So first person definition is where your character is also the narrator. So it's written as I moved, I got on the horse, I went into battle. And it can be done in present tense, so where the character is telling the story as it is happening to them. It can also be done as past tense, where the character is telling the story that happened to them beforehand. So, and it's very popular nowadays. It's very popular because it is very cinematic.
It's like a very believable framing, too. It's like someone's telling you a story. Like, I feel like third-person omniscient is always tricky because you don't really know who is actually knows all this stuff and is telling you a lot of the time. Whereas with first person, like, you accept that either the author themselves or one of the characters in the story is recounting the events.
Right.
I think it's worth mentioning that you can also, yes, you can have that immediacy. This is happening to me right now. The narrator is a character in the story. You can also have a more peripheral first-person narrator, like in The Great Gatsby, a person that comes into a situation and narrates the events.
Right, first-person bystander.
Yeah, exactly, because that buys you a particular point of view of the character that you're talking about, sort of thing. So
right.
The two are very different things. I think it's just worth highlighting.
Right. So they're both first person.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would add, or the one thing I would contrast with as first person bystander, is the person is retelling, they're still saying the story as I went here, I lived in this house, this person was doing this thing. They're telling the story about someone else. The argument I would say is they're still in the story.
Yeah, they're definitely still in the story. They're partaking in the story. The story is just about someone else rather than their
Or is it?
story.
Yes,
or is it? I mean,
exactly.
there's so many different variations, but it's definitely a technique that's used a lot. Like the Book Thief as well. Death narrates the entire novel, but it's really about a little girl. So it's another lens that you put on to say to say what you want to say.
Right.
I think and one of the biggest classic examples of that kind of first person peripheral would be a book that I'm sure all of us have unfortunately read, Moby Dick. It's like obviously a story about Captain Ahab and the whale, but it's Ishmael narrating as a mate on the boat.
So what is that?
Yeah, classic example.
What does that buy you then? I think it's really interesting.
It buys you a lot of chapters about how to make knots.
Yeah, a lot of descriptions of how whale blubber works for people to analyze later as a biblical metaphor.
Maybe a more naive perspective to see things through. So
yeah, I think it gives you solid framing. Definitely, it gives you like a potentially believable. Not that that's super important in spec fic, but it kind of gives you like some grounding. Like there's an actual person who experienced this and is telling you about it, even though it's a story about someone or something else.
And a first person, like this person is coming to the situation for the first time.
Yeah, and it's always, and again, it's always about distance. We've talked about this in third person omniscient, third person close. There's no monolithic way of saying this is how first person is written. First person bystander is just a distance from the actual story that's going on. So,
AP, you have an example from a short story that you're actually about to be published.
Yes. Congratulations.
By the time this goes out, it will have appeared in 5 on the 5th, which is an online literary magazine. So this is a short story. It's called Mugs, and I really struggle with this because I made the unfortunate mistake of doing this in first person present, and that presented a whole mess of challenges, and it was really tough for me to get through, but I eventually...
Not too unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it turned out okay.
Well, right, yeah.
But it was definitely very difficult going through and writing it. So here we go. The mug is empty before I can stop myself. Damn. I swore I would pace myself for first mug. Swore to make it last longer. Savor it. It's all I could think about when we shuffled into Tavern 381F. All I could think about until I remembered the damned suicide from earlier. Next mug. I'll do it next mug.
Nice.
So let me just ask you, so when you said it was a challenge, what was the things that you struggled with?
Writing in first person. I mean, that's something I had never really done before. So framing it so that the entire story, the entire world is happening literally through the eyes of this one person, and only what they see and only what they experience was tough. And then the second one was making it all happen in the present.
Yeah.
It was just tenses and, how does he describe something that happened earlier in the day versus what's happening right now?
And why did you make the choice ultimately?
I made the choice ultimately because the story is about his addiction to a drug. So I wanted the reader to be experiencing the weird things that he's experiencing in that moment.
As he experiences.
Exactly.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, if you had done it in third person, then it's a little more distant. You can't really, the way you do the first person present is almost like the story is a window into this person's mind in real time.
Yeah.
It's almost like first person telepathic tense.
First person telepathic. I don't like
And it
that.
also allowed me to kind of play a trick on the reader, which is what I was trying to do from the beginning. So that's another reason I did it.
The trick being that you don't, because we're so close in and experience it in the moment that he experiences it, we don't know what's going to happen, right? That's the trick you mean?
And he's an unreliable narrator,
right.
You find out.
So you mentioned unreliable narrator. Can you give us a quick description or explanation? What's an unreliable narrator?
So it's obviously a narrator, and it's someone that as the story unfolds, you find out that you are getting incorrect information from them. So
you the reader.
So either it's on purpose because they're lying to you, or they don't know everything. So you suddenly realize that the story you're getting isn't the truth.
Which I think is one of the greatest strengths for me of first person, because the whole idea of it is, what do you reveal about yourself as a first person narrator? How much do you reveal about yourself, and what do you not reveal about yourself? What do you want the world to get of you, sort of thing, which is something you only have access to as a first person narrator. You get to tell your side of things. So I think it's a strength for me. I think it's...
Yeah, I think it's definitely a strength of the first person. I think the other big one for me is this idea of the instantaneous, especially even if it's past. The fact that the person is telling the story in that moment, and the story's only revealed as they tell it. So if they stop, if they start to talk about something else, if they go and do something else, the story is paused, or it's up to them. That to me I think is one of the cool things about first person.
Or if, for example, let's say your narrator is embarrassed about something, they might try and embellish a story. They might try and pitch it in a way that...
or justify something, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and leaving out specific details of the story to make themselves look better or to make themselves look worse, because they may have a complex about something. It's very psychological sort of storytelling.
I think the flip side of that too, and this is maybe more of a personal problem of mine, is that when I read first person, I know that person lives. So if they're telling the story, I know, you know what I mean? So
if it's first person past.
If it's first person past, no, technically, even if it's first person present, how does that story get to me? Like, how is that written down? You know what I mean? Like,
for me, I think it kind of depends on the form. Like, first person present definitely works for me as a reader in a short story. Like an AP story, I'll follow inside this person's head for 10,000 words, no problem. But in a novel, it's really tricky. And I think that, I haven't read Hunger Games, but I think that is that first present?
It's first present. And can I say why I think that it works?
Yeah. Please.
And you guys can totally disagree with me if you want. But the whole setup of the novel is that, for me, these people in the city have unwittingly created their own undoing by making life very difficult for people in the districts. These people know how to hunt. They know how to kill. They know how to do things because life has been made extremely difficult for them. And that's their own undoing eventually. The people rise up from the districts and they overthrow them. That's the entire story. So what you get in Katniss is she's an extremely stoic narrator. She is not a child, even though she is very young. She has been brought up to be a soldier, essentially. And so what she reveals of herself through the narration is this extremely stoic, capable killer, essentially. It's what she has been made to be because of the city and because of the situation she's been put in. And that's something you only buy yourself that through doing it through first person, because she's the one that's revealing those aspects of herself to the readers. That's why I think it's a great concept. That's why I think it works. I know it grates some people a little bit, but I think the form fits the message.
It definitely, I mean, listen, it's definitely successful in that sense, in that it works as a story, it works in the form, and I think I think whatever problems I have with first person are completely overcome by the fact that I think the story moves so well and the pacing. I mean, I think everything else works well enough that it's sort of like, okay.
Well, it does. The thing that you bring up, though, the thing about first person is it does make it a little bit more, it can make it more obvious that there's a machination happening, a story.
Yeah,
where somehow in the third person close, it almost seems more natural and you can kind of sink into the storytelling sometimes more. Yeah. So I think you have to fight against that. And I think in the case of the Hunger Games, part of why it works is what you were talking about, but I also think it works because she's sort of like, because she's not as close as you would think in Katniss's head. Like there's a lot of stuff that, like you said, she says she's stoic. Like, and that to me, she's stoic because she's not revealing her inner turmoil as much.
Well, I would agree with you. I actually think that first person is less close than third.
Yeah.
Than third close, because they hold back so much.
The first person stories that really get me are when you have these main characters who you really just don't like for whatever reason. Like I find there's so many fantasy books where you have these first person characters who are quite frankly just conceited, you know. Oh, I can't believe they came to me. I'm the greatest mage who's ever lived, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh my God, I got to sit with a whole story with this guy. Like, that's the word. And they go through this, and that to me is a bigger problem is just, if you don't like the character, never mind that it's first person, but having to hear them, you know, go through the story and refer to themselves and kind of, it goes back to what you were saying, was like the character's going to reveal themselves, and you're like, oh, they keep revealing themselves as just the worst.
Because it's so voice heavy.
Yeah, exactly. It's so voice heavy. That's exactly it. Like, I don't care about this voice. When it's third person, there's at least a little bit of a filter. You're like, oh my God, I don't want to have to deal with this person much longer, you know?
Yeah, that's why people either love or hate characters like Holden Caulfield. Let's say he has such a unique, specific outtake on the world that if you don't like it,
if you're not
going to hate him.
It's going to be a bad ride.
It's going to be 200 pages
of
his thoughts about things.
I do feel that first person is like maybe a little more natural in like lit fic stuff that's set in the real world than in fantasy.
It's lots of YA uses first person.
A lot of YA is first person.
Definitely. Yeah. I've noticed that. It's just, for me as a reader, it's a little weird sometimes because it's like, who's really telling me this story? When I'm reading third person close, like Game of Thrones or something, I'm not worried about the framing. I don't even think about it. I'm just in the world, taking it all in.
Whereas, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, it does make you more aware of the story.
There's a person telling the story, and it's like,
it kind of puts it in your face.
I also think often my problem with a lot of YA first person is that I think authors think, oh, this immediately buys me intimacy with a character, and so...
And it does. I mean, it really does.
Well, it can.
It can, but just because you're using first person doesn't create intimacy with a character. That needs detail and thought, and, you know...
Well, yeah, no. But right, so, you have to be a good writer on top of it.
Right, so you often get these like...
Or your character has to be the type of person who is admitting to themselves stuff.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you can have a character that you're in their head and you might not know anything about them because they're not facing up to it. Right.
Yeah, just because you write a snarky teenage voice doesn't mean you have created the experience of what it's like to be a teenager, which I feel like is a pitfall that YA writers fall into all the time, over and over again.
Right.
The eye rolling and the hating on everything.
Yeah. Catcher in the Rye, derivative characters, I guess.
Could be. Yeah, could be. Although that was done well.
Second person, anyone?
Oh,
do we want to touch on it before we go?
You brought it. Why don't you touch it?
You touch it.
Well, so it's the oddball, you know, sort of voice here. You know,
you like lean in closer to the microphone. You begin to explain.
You try to get everybody to like enjoy Italo Calvino, but yeah, so. I brought.
Make us all take our medicine today.
Take your medicine. I hate you, Anton. So yeah, Calvino, this book is If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. So this is, let me just read the passage and it'll be obvious. So this is just a quick random paragraph from chapter 1. So perhaps you started leafing through the book already in the shop, or you were unable to because it was wrapped in its cocoon of cellophane. Now you're on the bus, standing in the crowd, hanging from a strap by your arm, and you begin undoing the package with your free hand, making movements, something like a monkey who wants to peel a banana and at the same time cling to the bough. Watch out, you're elbowing your neighbors. Apologize at least. So not only, he's also allowing you to fill in the story as you go.
Yeah. So let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
So define for me which second person is that? Is that second person as the reader, right? Or second person as the character?
As the
second person
character,
as the character. Okay.
Yeah, so he's doing it in a way that's sort of like I said, he's allowing you to kind of fill in the blanks of the story, kind of. And it's almost like he's like,
but he's also calling you a monkey,
right? But so like he's saying things like, oh, maybe you elbowed the passenger, you should apologize. It's almost like a quantum mechanics approach to writing fiction. It's like everything is happening and it's not happening at the same time.
So it's
Schrodinger's story.
Yes. So for the amateur writer out there listening to this, it's important.
Don't do it.
Second person is tough, right? I mean, I think that's a fair statement. It's a tough nut to crack because
it is. And I think one of the reasons why most people don't use it and we don't see very much of it is because it comes off very artificial.
It's a known. You can very much see the machine working.
Absolutely, and I think Calvino is playing with that in this piece where he's like, "Yes, let's bring that to the forefront.
Let's pretend you are in this thing, and this thing happens."
He's bringing that out, so like he's not even pretending as that you're in a getting lost in the narrative here. He wants you to remain aware at all times that there's a structure happening, a story.
Right. But we should also say that this does exist. The Choose Your Own Adventure books are second person.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Which are very obviously accessible and written for children and a ton of fun. But those are technically second person.
Well, and then there's Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, if you're the game master and you're describing what's happening to your players, then you walk into a room. It's dripping with slime.
But to be serious for a second,
Thank you, Lucy.
I also share. I am not in love with it. It's very difficult to read, but I have seen it done well recently in The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And she uses 3 different POV. If you want to study POV, read The Night Circus, because she uses first person, omniscient, third, and second. Jeez. And the whole thing is about the circus, and she will stop and use certain passages of second to describe you walking through the circus. So she'll say, you're entering the circus. Right. You see this on your right. And it's actually very effective because she just wants to get the setting across to you.
I agree it is effective. I read it too, and I think it's a really amazing book. I think one of the reasons why it does work is because she uses it very
selectively.
Selectively.
There's not a lot of it.
It's really tough. And I've read the entire Calvino book, and it's not my favorite Calvino book. It's not my favorite book, but because it can get a little tedious.
Is the whole thing written like that?
You as the monkey?
I think so, yeah.
I feel like
you're a monkey.
Sorry. I feel like the example you gave, Lucy, I haven't read Night Circus, but it reminds me of Lemony Snicket a lot.
Exactly.
He does the same thing where it's like some little passages are like him directly addressing the reader. It's like, if you have ever been in a terrifying situation, you would know, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then he'll also like put himself in as a character on the periphery for little snippets, just for that little like clever effect. And then the bulk of the story is in third omniscient.
So unlike the Calvino example, the Lemony Snicket example, and some of the other ones are breaking the fourth wall, which is a different way of doing the second person. So if you're doing second person, first of all, congratulations. And wow.
Well done.
You've made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
You should turn around now.
But think about whether you're having the character, whether you're saying you as the character, as the reader in the like Choose Your Own Adventure or the Calvino, or if it's you, the reader, I'm breaking the fourth wall, I've got a message for you. Yeah.
Cool. Is that all the persons? Do we?
There are
Well, we
other
talk about
persons in other
seventh
universes, but
Fourth person?
Ice 9.
Ice 9.
So that's POV. I think the real takeaway from this is when you're starting as a writer, when you're starting on whatever you're working on, know what your POV is.
Choose your weapon.
Choose your weapon wisely, and
to fit your subject
to
matter.
fit your subject, to fit your story. You can use multiple ones, but I think we use mostly third person. I feel that's safe to say, first person, because it allows the most flexibility. But again, I like what you said, Carter. Choose your weapon wisely. So, and I think we have some other sources if you want to get into this deeper, because I think this is a very deep subject.
Clearly a huge, huge topic.
I'll start with mine, which is my favorite writing book, which is called Writing Fiction, A Guide to Narrative Craft by Janet Burroway. I think it's in 9th or 10th edition now. You can pick up the 3rd or 4th edition used on Amazon very cheaply. It has mostly the same stuff.
Solid source for sure.
I reread this probably once a year.
Yeah, and another one that I found really great, if you're interested in trying to figure out, okay, this is the type of story I want to tell, which POV should I use, then Alicia Resley's The Power of Point of View, Make Your Story Come to Life is really great from a craft perspective. I would check that out.
Awesome.
Great.
Was that the one you just put it on Facebook?
Yeah.
Okay, it's in my Amazon
It's really good.
cart.
Really, really good.
This has been The Genre Hustle. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.